to the Boropolis podcast. As usual, I'm joined with Nathan, and this week we have the matter of a 1-1 draw at home to Huddersfield to discuss. Nathan, we won't go into the football just yet. Leading up to the game, how was your week?
Yeah, it was all right. Not too bad. Of course, we recorded a little bit later in the week last week because of me coming back from holiday. And we pretty much discussed everything prior to Huddersfield, which was quite good that we didn't miss anything and we can just get into talking about the game. But yeah, I'm all right. What about yourself?
Yeah, you just said there, just before I answer your question, Nathan, you just said there it's a good thing that we can jump straight into the game, but I'm not sure some sections of the fan base would agree, considering the sort of 60% meltdown that I seem to be seeing from a lot of fans. But yeah, to answer your question, Nathan, I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, was hoping that yesterday would be the day we'd get our first 3 points of the season, but it wasn't to be, was it? We did score a goal though, so you've got to take the silver linings out of these things. So yeah, that's enough to put a smile on my face for the weekend, and yeah, I'm gonna have to go with that as my sort of positive for the weekend because otherwise I'm sort of clutching at straws really. But yeah, Nathan, Huddersfield at home, 5 changes from the team that went to Coventry and were beaten 3-0. I think we spoke about it in the podcast earlier on this week and pretty much said the sort of main talking points were going to be whether Engel and Lath would be put in from the off. We both sort of agreed that actually it's not really Carrick's style to do something sort of as bold as that. But actually we were very wrong, to be honest, weren't we?
Yeah, we were, and it was a pleasant surprise seeing both of those names on the team sheet, as well as a few others as well. As you mentioned there, Chris, 5 changes to the side that was defeated at Coventry. Also coming in, apart from the new signings, were Rav Vandenberg, who came into right back instead of Paddy McNair. Johnny Howson started this game instead of Dan Barlasser, and Marcus Forss came in ahead of Isaiah Jones as well. So 3 changes there, of course. Crooks was dropped as well for Latte Lath, and Coulson dropped for Engel. And looking at the team, I thought, yeah, it's a decent side playing at home, probably going to dominate the ball against Neil Warnock's side. We know what his teams are like. And yeah, I thought that team sort of would possibly have enough to get at Huddersfield and cause them a few problems. Of course, it was going to be a bit fresh for Boro fans, and that's including me and you, Chris, watching the new signings because, of course, we've only had a very, very small sample size to go off in terms of what to expect from those two. But yes, I was very much looking forward to the game when I saw that starting 11.
Yeah. It was a real surprise, to be honest. Obviously, as I've mentioned, we sort of, I think we basically judged it off how Carrick integrated Cameron Archer into the lineup last season, and we saw how long that took him to finally get a start. And I was expecting something similar, but I guess probably not so much the pressure, but given the result last week, I guess in the end, Michael Carrick just thought there's nothing to lose, to be honest. And yeah, for me, it was the correct decision. Both players had had a full pre-season, and I think in the end, it was the correct decision. And to be honest, the full team as a whole, there was only one sort of question mark over the selection for me, and that was Riley McGree maintaining his place on the bench. That's probably a topic that we'll cover a little bit later on in the podcast, though, once we've gone through the game. But yeah, Nathan, going into the game, there was sort of that excitement in the stadium, really, as you say, because of the new signings almost. I guess both being unknown quantities, we didn't know sort of what they would offer, how the team would line up in terms of in shape. out of possession and obviously in possession. But actually, in the early stages of the game, Latif was quite involved. A few layoffs, a few nice little bits of movement that we saw, and actually quite a sort of a positive start to the game for Boro.
Yeah, it was. One of the early moments in the game that does stick out was Latif getting the ball, turning onto that left foot and trying to get a shot off, even though it didn't really pay off and sort of just trickled wide. He didn't catch it right. It was a really positive sign just seeing him pick up the ball and trying to get out of centre half. I think that's something that we've certainly missed in, well, so far this season, I suppose. But yeah, I was quite surprised in terms of his build, really. I thought that he'd be a little bit taller than he is. But yeah, he's certainly a very strong lad for his build. And yeah, he showed some promising signs in the first half. Of course, he had that shot with his right foot this time that was sort of laid back from the right-hand side. But despite a few early chances, Huddersfield, I think it's sort of what you come to expect from Neil Warnock's sides a little bit. Possibly not his Middlesbrough side, but in his sides in general, the set piece threat is a really big factor in the way that they play. And I sort of expected at the start of the game that that was where their chances would come from. And especially with the delivery of Sorba Thomas, we saw him a few years ago now under Carlos Corberan for that Huddersfield team that finished third in the Championship. He was ridiculous on set pieces when they came to the Riverside that day. And yeah, he was certainly maintaining that threat. And yeah, they had quite a big opportunity, I think it was maybe 20 minutes into the first half, where the cross comes in at the box. I think it was a bit of a mismatch at the back post. I think it was Johnny Howson marking
Yeah,
Hellick, who Hellick flicked it on, and then Matty Pearson sort of flicked a shot towards goal, and Dieng made a good save. But yeah, they were always going to be a big threat from set pieces, especially with us having a first-hand experience of it in April with Pearson scoring a brace against us. So we certainly knew his threat. But yeah, I thought that Boro in the early stages did start bright.
yeah, I tend to agree with everything you've said there, really, Nathan. As you say, we sort of almost expected. I think everyone knew what Neil Warnock was going to bring his Huddersfield side to the Riverside and how they were going to play, really. Listen, Sorba Thomas, it's a weird one with him, really, because he was at Blackburn last season on loan and didn't really probably get the minutes that he'd had in the previous season. But I know we were just speaking before we'd started recording about your dad's thoughts on him, and yesterday was a constant threat. His delivery from set pieces constantly on the money, and even his crosses in open play were causing us problems. And yeah, that was, for me, that was, apart from Josh Koroma, who seems to always score the exact same goal against us every season, where he cuts in from the left and bends it into the far corner. There was a few occasions where he had sort of managed to find himself in a situation where Van den Berg was quite isolated, and obviously there was a clear mismatch in terms of pace between those two. But actually, I felt, apart from a few crosses into the box, Van den Berg sort of managed to stop him enough without sort of really allowing him to grow too much into the game. But yeah, as you say, throughout the first half, I felt that we looked more of the Middlesbrough side that we had done last season under Michael Carrick, and not by any stretch sort of to those levels of where we blew teams out of the water within 20 minutes, you know, thinking of those sort of Norwich games and things like that. But we looked far more in control of the game, managed to have loads of the ball, lots of rotations. There was a few times even that really Huddersfield was sitting that deep that Dale Fry would sort of have it on the halfway line, look around and think, well, actually, there's probably 10 metres of absolute space for me to run into and try and pick a pass. And although sort of, you know, you don't look at Dale Fry as Franz Beckenbauer, you don't expect him to step out and sort of find intricate little passes and thread these gaps. There was a number of times where he was almost in disbelief at how much space he had on the ball. And unfortunately, really, we didn't sort of manage to create any glaringly obvious chances. I think the best chance of the half really is some good work from Hayden Hackney, obviously the goal scorer on the day. And I think actually he probably will look back on the game and think he probably should have had a brace at least.
Yeah, I didn't quite realise how good of a chance it was until I've seen it back. And yeah, Lath's work there was really, really good. He lost the ball in the initial phase and Huddersfield tried to step out, but he chased back, won the ball, and yeah, it was picked up by Hackney, who drove forward, played a 1-2 with Rodgers, and he's bearing down on goal, maybe 6 yards out, tries to play it into that far corner, but Nichols makes a good save. And yeah, as you say, that was probably the best chance of the half. I think it's just sort of going back to Sorba Thomas and talking about his threat in the game. Obviously, he was playing on the right-hand side for Huddersfield yesterday, and with Boro having a new left-back in Lucas Engel, who, in his club interview when he signed, he said that his sort of standout attributes are going forward. I feel that we didn't really see that yesterday at all from him, and that was because Sorba Thomas penned him back, really. His threat sort of penned him back, stopped him from going forwards. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because as a left back, I don't necessarily want him to stand out as a sore thumb. Like in previous weeks, Hayden Coulson stood out in a negative way. Engel probably wasn't mentioned at all yesterday, which is perfect for me. He was a standout 7 out of 10 and kept Sorba Thomas relatively quiet throughout the game. There was a few crosses into the box that didn't really come to much, but I thought he did a really good job defensively against him. And
it was interesting actually, having mentioned that. I do agree. I think it was probably a little bit of both in the way in which Sorba Thomas is a threat, but actually, I don't know if you'd heard after the game that Carrick pretty much told BBC Tees that actually it was a direct instruction that he sort of, because of Silvera's presence on the left and sort of his, I guess, natural winger tendencies to try and beat his fullback and get to the byline, Engel had been told just sort of be a little bit conservative almost and just sort of be sensible with when you bomb on. And like you say, I was really pleased with sort of that side of the game. I think everyone was expecting him from what we've heard from him, as you say, in his club interview and different clips and things like that. Everyone was expecting a sort of lung-busting runs and crosses into the box. And I think even his previous manager mentioned one of his strengths being his shooting, which I found interesting given that he's a left back. So yeah, everyone was sort of expecting that, as you say. But actually, I think it's a positive, really, that most people come away from the game yesterday and thought, well, you couldn't really give him below a 6 or a 7 because he didn't really sort of do anything massively wrong, but he also didn't do anything that you sort of sat back and thought, wow, that's really impressive. But it was just a solid performance from him. And as you say, given Sorba Thomas's threat and what Michael Carrick had said, it was definitely interesting sort of seeing that dynamic of Silvera playing in front of him. I think obviously that would probably change if that had been McGree off the left, and obviously the space that he creates when he sort of inverts as more of a number 10, really.
yeah, I agree with you. I think that sort of just came from looking at the team and seeing Vandenberg at right back. I
Yeah,
sort of assumed that he'd shuffle across and it would make almost like a back three, and then that'd allow Engel to bomb on and sort of play like we did last year, which yeah, it gave us a different option that with Engel sort of staying back yesterday and having Silvera isolated against Huddersfield's right back. So yeah, I think that's a fair move from Carrick actually to sort of give Engel that instruction. But yeah, I think as we say, going back to the first half, relatively quiet on chances. We did have the best chance of the half, but there were some promising signs. Latte Lat's movement was one that did stand out, and his hold up play as well, trying to just knock the ball off on one touch, was, as I mentioned earlier, relatively physical for such a sort of. I think he's got that similar build to Cameron Archer a little bit in the way that they're sort of short, but kind of sort of stocky in a way,
Yeah,
um, where they don't get knocked off the ball very easily and sort of deceptively strong. So yeah, it is good to have a player like that. Just when we get onto the second half, I think that the clinical edge is possibly what sort of splits the two players apart.
yeah. I think you're right. And on Latte Laugh, I've already seen the comparison early on this morning on Twitter, but after about probably 15 minutes, I think actually the chance that Hackney gets, where, as you say, he loses the ball and then works his socks off to get it back and wins the tackle immediately, I just thought, this is Tunjai, isn't it? He's going to run himself into the ground and probably be a little bit of a cult figure because of his work rate. And as you say, look, you want your striker to be more than just a cult figure because he runs around and chases sort of lost causes. But as you say, yeah, that sort of clinical edge that in with his chance in the second half, if you sort of swap Cameron Archer and Emmanuel Latte Lath, you sort of probably see a different end product in that situation. But listen, I think it's like when people were comparing Aidan Coulson to Ryan Giles. There's going to be obvious differences, but yeah, as you say, I think it probably would have been a different ending had that been Cameron Archer. But just in terms of his first half performance, I guess in terms of his general performance throughout the game until he was substituted off, some really, really promising signs for me there. Give us a vocal point. I think linked up quite well with Morgan Rogers, who I felt looked so much more comfortable in the 10, picking up the ball from deeper pockets. And yeah, it just gave us more of a vocal point. I think we were just crying out for. We spoke in both podcasts previously about how uncomfortable Morgan Rogers looked trying to have his back to the game. And actually, that was quite the opposite to Latte Lath. He looked very much happy to sort of play on Huddersfield's backline and really sort of terrify them with some of his movements in the first half. And yeah, I was really pleased. I think obviously we've spoken about Engel and why he probably shined so much on his debut, but definitely some really, really promising signs. And I think moving forward, I come away from the stadium yesterday being, excited and looking forward to what's to come from him, as opposed to sort of thinking, oh God, what have we signed here?
Yeah, and I think everyone's sort of hope going into the second half was that he would get that one opportunity that would get Middlesbrough into the lead and hopefully get them on the way to 3 points. But as was the case in April, Boro try and make it very hard against Huddersfield straight after half time. I mean, this one wasn't after 20 seconds like it was at the John Smith Stadium in April. It was after a minute and 20 seconds as Sorba Thomas fires a corner into the box. It looks like it's going to cause a little bit of chaos, and it does exactly that. It misses a Huddersfield player at the front post, and it comes off Dale Fry's shin, past Seni Dieng into the front post. Boro 1-0 down at home once again, and it looks like Boro are going to have a very, very difficult afternoon trying to break down Neil Warnock's side.
Yeah, just again, before the game had even started yesterday, I was speaking to my dad, and he said the one thing, not just that this is sort of, some great insight from my dad. I think most people would have said the same, but we were having the conversation that basically the last thing that you want to do against the Neil Warnock side is concede first, because they just make it 10 times more difficult. And as you say, that's exactly what we did. And it's a strange one, because obviously, if you've not listened to this podcast before, or if it sort of hasn't, you've missed it in previous podcasts, me and Nathan sit sort of lower central of the West Stand, and from both of our angles we've spoken about it's sort of, the corner was quite low actually, and it wasn't really floated, it was whipped to the front post, and you were just expecting a Middlesbrough player to clear it. And actually, I think the sort of, as you say, the first Huddersfield player that it misses almost throws Dale Fry off. He gets himself a little bit flat-footed, and then the deflection just goes in off him, and it's not well worked. It is just one of them where Dale Fry will probably look back at it and think, yeah, that's not what I want to see back. It's not a bad delivery, but to be truthfully honest, I don't think it's even Sorba Thomas's best delivery of the day. I think he put in better crosses into the box from open play and from other set pieces. And yeah, we give ourselves a mountain to climb, don't we? Really, I think it would be fair to say I don't think I'd be sort of overstepping the mark to say it was against the run of play. I don't think Huddersfield had offered too much, and it was always going to be a set piece that they were going to take the lead from if they did. And of course, that's exactly what they did. And as you say, the silver lining from this game is that we didn't concede after 20 seconds. We managed to get to about the a minute mark just after half time.
Yeah, it's a constant sort of theme with the Huddersfield games. And I'll be hoping on Boxing Day, not Boxing Day, in that Christmas week, that when we go to the John Smith Stadium, that the pattern does not continue, because it is doing my head in playing them and seeing the same things happen over and over again. But yeah, after the goal, Huddersfield did have a spell where they were on top, and if they did double the lead, it could have been the end of us. But
Yeah,
it could have been the end of us, and it could have been the end of this podcast being a little bit more upbeat than it probably would have been. But yeah, after maybe a 10-minute spell after the goal, Boro sort of grew back into the game, and did have a few chances prior to the goal. I think that there was a couple of efforts, but yeah, on 60 minutes, around the hour mark of the game, Hayden Hackney steps up and just takes control, I suppose. Leading up to the goal, Lenihan wins the ball in the middle of the park and sort of steps forward with it, lays it off to Rodgers, who, as you mentioned in the first half, looked a lot more comfortable in the 10, and quite similarly to his run last week at Coventry, he sort of heads off on a run again into the Huddersfield penalty area, gets his shot off, the ball gets recycled, Hayden Hackney gets the ball towards the left-hand side of the 18-yard box and just decides, I'm just going to smash it.
yeah.
And me and you, where we sit, as you mentioned there, Chris, were sort of sat right behind it. So as soon as it's left his boot and gone through the Huddersfield player's legs, I could just see it arrowing into the top corner. And yeah, some finish.
Yeah, it is. It's an absolute rocket. And listen, we said that Hayden Hackney should have had a goal earlier on in the game. And yes, he should have, but by goodness, does he make up for that missed chance, because it's an absolute rocket, isn't it? It's I always think of players when sort of they make that step up from perhaps the Championship to the Premier League and really start to develop a name for themselves, that what sort of allows them to make that step up and gain the attention that they deserve, these types of players, is when they're able to sort of take games by the scruff of the neck and put their stamp on it. And that's exactly what he does here, because throughout the game, I thought he was really good again. As always, from what we expect now from Hayden Hackney, brilliant on the ball, always looks to go forward. And I think this season especially, and he spoke about it going into this season, I believe, that he wanted to add more goals to his game. He seems to creep forward a little bit more now, and we're starting to see what he's capable of, sort of in more attacking positions. And yeah, as I say, takes the game by the scruff of the neck and just thinks, yeah, I'm getting my team back into this game. And that's exactly what he does. It's a phenomenal effort. I think probably only beaten to goal of the day by Aaron Ramsey's goal at Leicester, which is an absolute worldie in fairness. But yeah, on any other day, I think he wins goal of the day. As you say, it's an absolute arrow from the moment that it leaves his boot. From my situation, I think I was the first one up in the stadium because I knew it was flying straight into that top corner. And yeah, from that point, I thought, well, we've got our first goal of the season. The stadium was bouncing. Everyone was thinking, right now, this is such a great opportunity to turn the game on its head and really, really put Huddersfield's defence under some real pressure. And for quite a few different chances and different occasions, we were able to do that. But actually, Nathan, we just couldn't find that finishing touch for the rest of the second half and get ourselves into the lead, could we?
No, we couldn't. And that's the sickening blow, I suppose, that you don't get your first win of the season. A lot of the conversation on Twitter after the game is, well, there's positive signs. It could have been a 4-1 game, 5-1 game, and Middlesbrough on another day come out of the game with 3 points and, well, absolutely battering Huddersfield. But they didn't. That's the top and bottom of it. They missed the chances and it's cost them 2 points, I suppose. Talking about Hayden Hackney, one of the better chances that we're going to talk about is when he lays Emmanuel Latte-Lath through on goal. And we'd seen his pace in the first half. And in this instance, it looks like he can really stretch his legs and get going. And he is on his way, in fairness to him. He does get to the ball ahead of the Huddersfield player. And I just think he's took it too close. I think he's just sort of already probably got his celebration in his head.
Yeah. He's got his shining lights.
He does.
Goal, doesn't he?
He
and
does.
Gets to sort of finish the chance that he's. In fairness, it's a great ball, but without his pace, if that falls to Matt Crooks, it doesn't become as good of a chance. In fairness,
no, it doesn't. And I suppose one of the positives that does come out of yesterday is that we have some pace in the forward line now, and we cried out for it probably prior to January last season, talking about the need for pace up front, the need to be able to stretch defences, and we got that with Cameron Archer. And now we've got something in Emmanuel Latte-Lath that can stretch defences. Same with Sammy Silvera when Latte-Lath went off, and Silvera, particularly in stoppage time, had a good few opportunities that were sort of laid in behind for him, and he had the beating of Huddersfield's defenders. Okay, I suppose that they've just played 90 minutes playing up against Latte-Lath, trying to compete with him, and now Silvera is sort of inverted and was playing up front almost, and they're probably knackered. But we've got pace up front now, which is really important. But we just need to start taking chances. Yeah, after that Latte-Lath one, I think that the biggest and the most sort of standout chance that goes begging is, of course, the one from Sammy Silvera. Riley McGree did come on the pitch and sort of drove inside, was getting pushed away from goal a little bit, sort of laid the ball wide to Isaiah Jones, who, it's a great ball. He's laid it on an absolute plate for Silvera. Instead of laying it across the 6-yard box, he's cut it back towards that penalty spot. And from our view in the ground, it looks for everything in the world that this is going to be 2-1 Middlesbrough, 3 points. And the ball is slowly rolling towards that penalty spot. And you're just thinking, just hit the target and it's in. Just hit the target and it's in. And similar to last week at Coventry, Sammy Silvera, with his right foot, scoops the ball over the crossbar. He's leaning back, and Middlesbrough do not have 3 points on the board for the first time this season.
Yeah, it's as golden of an opportunity as you're probably ever likely to get, isn't it? As you say, McGree, I think everyone was sort of waiting for him to get a shot off on his right foot, and actually he does well, slows everything down to then just slip it to Jones. And in fairness, whether he sort of just put it in an area or whether he's purposefully pulled it back to this the penalty spot, I'm not so sure. But he does manage to pick out the right ball. And as you say, I think there was a collective gasp in the stadium. Even the Huddersfield defenders, just it all felt in slow motion as you waited for that second, as the ball rolled towards Silvera. And as you say, all he needs to do is hit the target. And he does exactly what he did it as exactly what he did at Coventry. Easy for me to say. Leans back and just balloons it, and it's agonizing, really, because that was the moment. It's really quite ridiculous, because if that goes in, you win 2-1, you walk out the stadium and think, well, we've got the job done. But you probably look back and laugh at some of the other chances. The one that Latif sort of falls over his own feet with, the Hackney chance, even the Rodgers chance in the build up to sort of Hackney equalising, all really, really good really good chances. But yeah, my goodness, I don't know what to say, to be honest, because he tucked away a few similar chances in pre-season. He scored in the cup game, and you almost just expect him to just roll it in. And whether it's just tired legs, obviously he'd sort of been busy throughout the game, little turns of pace and trying to stretch that Huddersfield back line, and he just doesn't manage to compose himself. And it really, really hurts watching it back. I'm not going to lie. He even has a chance after that where, in fairness, I think it's Crooks that puts him in behind. And the only thing I'd say about this one is he has the beating of Pearson, I think it is. And Silvera, obviously being a right-footed player, playing off the left, all you want him to do is drive in front and across the player, so that if he can't get his shot off, he's going to be fouled and brought down. And if he doesn't win a penalty, it's going to be a definite red card. And instead, he sort of tries to go on the outside and fluffs his shot as well. And it's not as good of a chance. But my goodness, they're just two glorious chances. And yeah, it's a game that I think everyone will look back on, whether, regardless of what happens now from now until the end of the season, thinks, how did we not win that game in the end? And unfortunately, because of the other two results to start the season in the league, it almost flips the whole dynamic of the full sort of feeling amongst the fan base. Because if it goes in, everyone goes away happy and thinks, right, we're finally on the board. First 3 points of the season. The new players have looked promising. Silvera scored another goal, and everyone goes away happy. But instead, he misses that chance, and everyone leaves the stadium, or at least sort of the majority of fans. And there's almost a collective, I don't want to say meltdown, but sort of overriding negative feeling because of the fact that we haven't come away with 3 points, and it's just fine margins. It's so frustrating because I thought when Huddersfield had scored, I thought, oh, here we go. This is just going to be such a typical Neil Warnock, for want of a better word, shithouse performance that they don't deserve. And we did the hard part. We got the leveller, a fantastic goal from Hayden Hackney, and you just want us to get our noses in front. And unfortunately, as I could go around in circles for another hour, we just don't manage to find that finishing touch and wrap up the 3 points.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Chris. It's one of frustration. And I think as you were sort of explaining that Silvera chance there, you were almost speechless trying to describe it. And I
I was,
think I
it
think
hurt.
everyone in the ground as he's sort of hit the shot and you can see it ballooning over the bar, everyone was like hands on heads, jaw to the floor, couldn't believe it. And yeah, I think he's probably in a position there where he's thought, how am I in this position here where it's the last minute of the game? We haven't had too much of a sniff of this easy of an opportunity all day. And it's fallen to me in the 90th minute. Oh, I'm just going to blast it as hard as I can. And he's blasted it and it's nearly took the roof off the North Stand. But yeah, frustration a little bit. It's a point. Probably should have been three. And that is where the frustration comes from. We conceded the goal, which is an error on our part because it's a set piece and it's an own goal again. And we get ourselves back into the game. We have the better chances in the game by a million miles. And once again, we only score one and we don't put the game, well, we don't get into the lead and we don't put the game beyond doubt, which it could have and it should have been. It should have been a 3 or 4-1 game. It wasn't. 1-1 full time. Boro earned their first point of the season and are in a positive sense off the mark, at least in the championship. But yeah, um, I think now we'll have to throw out the discussion points of yesterday's game, which I think one, which is a main talking point that you threw out on Twitter yesterday, was quite simply just quite simply put in a tweet. Riley McGree, discuss. So Chris, take it away. Riley McGree, discuss.
Yeah, as you say, I put the tweet out, and this actually, interestingly, basically, I think a lot of the discussion around the lineup and what I'd mentioned earlier or alluded to earlier was the fact that Riley McGree now, for 2 games in a row, has found it. Well, actually, for 3 games in a row, obviously, he started the Huddersfield Cup game on the bench, has found himself not starting a game. And for me personally, I just can't really get my head around it. Listen, he's a player that is never probably going to grab the headlines in terms of going and getting double figures in goals and assists and contributions. But for me, he's such a vital cog in the way we play, the way we played last season. Obviously, we sort of spoke about it a little bit earlier with overlapping fullback. He allows that channel basically to become free space for our left back. He inverts, he becomes a 10 in those little pockets. He picks up some great positions in and around the box. I feel like he's real sort of standout attribute is his ability to sort of intricately find passes in those pockets and keep rotations going when sometimes if we're playing against a team like Huddersfield, for example, they're happy to just put men behind the ball and you need that player to sort of pick up them positions where defensive midfielders don't really want to go. They don't want to look over the shoulder and think, who should I actually be picking up here? Because I'm not sure if McGree's a winger or if he's a 10. And for me, that's exactly what his strength is. His ability basically to allow others to find space, but also his ability to just get in between the lines and be a nuisance and pick those sort of, typically what I would say is he's always the player, for example, yesterday, that before the actual assist, he plays the pass or he finds a position that allows someone to play the pass, which we then score off. The pre-assist, if you want to call it that, I guess. That's not a term that I absolutely enjoy at all. In fact, I quite hate the term, to be honest, but I'm going to use it just in this circumstance. But yeah, I'm very much in the camp that Riley McGree should be one of the starters in those three positions behind our number 9 week in, week out, because of his cleverness, because of those little pockets that he can pick up. You, Nathan, have actually very much the opposite opinion of me. And that's basically why it was put to Twitter last night, because for whatever reason, he's went from being almost one of the first names on the team sheet in such a good run in the team last season to now seemingly finding himself as actually an option off the bench, which I just can't wrap my head around.
Well, I can kind of tell you for why that's probably happening, which is because Ryan Giles is no longer at the club. We don't have that overlapping, or at least we didn't have that overlapping left back like we did last year with Ryan Giles. And of course, in last season's system, yes, Riley McGree was an important cog in the Middlesbrough team of last season because he allowed Giles to have pretty much the left flank to himself, whilst McGree was another body in the middle of the park that could sort of be good in those rotations, knock the ball on one touch. However, now in this Middlesbrough side, where okay, in the first 2 weeks of the season we've had Hayden Coulson there, who I think, just not to pick bones with Hayden Coulson, but possibly doesn't quite understand the Ryan Giles role, that I'm going to coin that phrase there for this Middlesbrough side. It doesn't quite understand how to play that role to Ryan Giles's potential. So we have a left back at the start of the season that wasn't as good going forward as Giles. Similar defensively, which is pretty hit and miss, I suppose. So he's probably, for the most part, instructed Coulson to not bomb on as far as Giles did. And we saw that in the opening 2 games. We didn't see Hayden Coulson playing as a left winger pretty much as we sort of maybe expected that he would. But with that, you then want someone in that left-sided attacking midfield or left-sided winger role that can offer you something going forward, which we didn't have from the left-back position. This is what I'm trying to say in the first few games. So his usual player that he opted for, well, following the opening day of the season, which that was McGree, following those games, it's been Silvera, who, as we've seen, his attributes are his pace. He tries to get at players in the main. So I think mainly the reason that he hasn't been getting in is because of the issue at left back. And as you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, Chris, that Carrick instructed Engel to sort of stay back yesterday. He's possibly wanting to encourage Silvera to get at his fullback. And yesterday he's picked Silvera because he thought he was the best man for the job. There's no doubt in my mind that Riley McGree will probably find his way back into the Middlesbrough team if Engel is to be a left back that's similar to Ryan Giles in any shape or form, that wants to get forward, and possibly this is going maybe a little bit too far, but negating defensive duties a little bit, like Ryan Giles did last year, and you have the right back invert. So I think Riley McGree will come back in eventually. He is a player that divides opinion. For me, I want my attacking midfielders to provide goals and assists. And I understand that last season we had other players that were very much smashing the numbers for that. You had Force, who was in double figures for goals. Of course, Akpom scores now nearly 30 goals for you. And then you have Cameron Archer that chipped in after Christmas. You had Matt Crooks even, who chipped in with near enough 10. And with that, Riley McGree did have some good numbers last year with him. At the start of the season, he scored against Swansea. And then as Boro became the force to be reckoned with, I suppose, under Michael Carrick, he did flourish in that role, in the left side attacking midfield role. And at times last year, like in the Huddersfield away game, we did miss a player like Riley McGree. And when he came off the bench against Huddersfield in that game, he came on and crossed the ball in for Rakpom to score. So look, he's a player that does divide opinion. I'm still yet to be 100% convinced by him, because for me, I think some fans have gone a little bit too early with their view, and too extreme, which is that he's the best midfielder at the club, which that opinion is, I'm a million miles away from agreeing with that opinion. I think that's miles off the pace. But for me, he's a player that is steady. He's not a player that's going to drag the game by the scruff of the neck and win you the game. He's a cog in a system where he'll probably be second, third, even fourth fiddle behind his other attacking options, like he was last year. I think you looked at our team last year and you'd have said, probably when Aaron Ramsey came in, especially, he was almost negated as our fifth best attacker, perhaps. And now, I suppose, having lost pretty much every single one of them, people are clamouring for him back in the team. I can see why, because we've lacked that person that could possibly unlock the door. People are sort of grown sick of Matt Crooks in the number 10 position, because he's been largely anonymous in the games that he's played there. And look, as I mentioned, I think he will find his way back in at the side. But he's a player that divides opinion. And I think that what makes it all the more strange, perhaps, is a few rumblings on forums that he's off, which to me, I find it complete. I think people are just trying to stir the pot, really.
Yeah, I think in this situation, especially, often, like any player, it's not just Riley McGree. As soon as someone's not in the team for a few weeks, you get these sort of rumblings. And to be honest, there might be some truth in it, there might not be. At the moment, it's just complete hearsay. So there's no sort of actual credible information that's been out from any journalist. It's just absolute hearsay. So we can't really judge it off that. But in terms of just what Riley McGree brings to Michael Carrick's Middlesbrough side, for me, and I think judging off, look, it's not sort of the whole fan base's opinion, but from a decent sort of sample size of opinions, a lot of people also are sort of questioning as to why he's sort of basically dropped out the team at the moment. And yeah, listen, that's why we love football, because of differences of opinions. And I think it's definitely interesting that some people would probably regard Riley McGree as up there with potentially some of the best sort of intricate number 10 slash inverted wingers, whatever you want to call them, in the league. And I guess that probably just comes down to people's opinions on if your winger or number 10 should score loads of goals and get loads of assists, or if you sort of, let's use the phrase the eye test. If you watch a game and you can see what they're bringing, even if it's not through, massive numbers in terms of goals and assists. And actually, listen, I would say my opinion is partially down to that. I think he's just such a clever footballer in the pockets that he picks up. Some people, you disagree with that. We went back and forth all night last night, basically disagreeing as to what we want from our sort of three in behind the striker. And listen, it is interesting. It would be interesting to hear more opinions. If you've got to this point in the podcast and you want to offer your opinion, by all means, leave it in the comments, tweet us, because it's an interesting debate. And obviously, the sort of longer that Riley McGree isn't starting games for Middlesbrough, I guess the more that topic is going to become a bigger talking point. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, definitely, Nathan.
It is. And I think what should be said is there is certainly a reason behind why he isn't starting. And I don't know the reason. You don't know the reason, Chris. We are currently throwing out possibilities for why he isn't starting games, hence like why I've just thrown out the left back chat. But there is a reason that Michael Carrick isn't picking him. And I suppose the top and bottom of it is Michael Carrick's the manager of Middlesbrough, and he's probably a little bit more qualified to make decisions than me,
People like
you, people like me, people like you, people like everyone on Twitter. And there's a reason why he isn't picking him, and that's why he gets paid a wage to make those decisions. So we'll just have to wait and see whether he does come back into the fold. But I imagine that he will do.
Yeah, and I think actually that sort of brings us on quite nicely to a topic that I wanted to go over. And again, we sort of covered it towards the back end of last podcast. And I said, with the Tuba money, obviously stating the obvious, we aren't just going to have a lump sum of £12 million to spend straight away. It's going to be in instalments, but there is now going to be some funds available. You'd like to think that we can strengthen those positions in our attacking line. And I've seen a lot of people mention sort of what they think that we need. And we kind of almost glossed over it last week. I don't think we sort of went into specifics. In terms of our attacking line, and because of from what I saw of Latte Laugh yesterday, I think it's reaffirmed, in my opinion, what I feel that we need now going into the final weeks of the transfer window. And although overall, overwhelmingly positive, Latte Laugh's debut yesterday, but like we did see, his finishing was a little bit erratic. As we did see from Morgan Rogers, good signs in the 10, finishing a little bit erratic, not convincing. I feel that we really lack someone with a complete killer instinct. And listen, I know that is such a hard thing to find. I'm pretty sure every team in the league are looking for that type of player. But in terms of just positions and numbers, I now look at the departure of Akpom and from sort of noises around Josh Coburn potentially being allowed to go out on loan. I think we now need to see another number 9 come in. Someone that I would class as, I'm hesitant to use the word, but a marquee second striker / number 10, or someone that can just play the 3 positions behind the striker. And I've seen a lot of sort of talk about a right back as well, and I, I look at the positions in the attacking line and think that that's where we need players. And actually, I don't really sort of look at anywhere else on the pitch. I've seen arguments around potentially wanting a different type in midfield, perhaps more of a destroyer as a Howson replacement, as opposed to Dan Barlaser or Piero that are more sort of ball players. I can kind of understand that. But unless Tommy Smith and Dykesfield have got really, really bad injuries, which from what we're hearing, that isn't the case, I think we've got enough to get by in defence. And I just really look at that forward line and still think I wouldn't say we're desperate now because obviously we've had additions in that area, but I still think we sort of lack that senior striker or number 10 that everyone's going to look at and think, yeah, that's our man. He's going to score 15 goals, let's say.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you there as well. I think that we're missing two players in those attacking areas, really. You look at the players we've lost in terms of their output last season, which, okay, we were a team that were sort of going for promotion, and we signed Cameron Archer, who everyone in the league would have wanted to sign. And I mean, his impact was unprecedented, really. We signed Aaron Ramsey, who, okay, didn't have the best spell at Norwich in terms of numbers, but came to Middlesbrough and stood out really, really well, and is going to get a Premier League move because of it. I think that the players that we brought in, it's clear to see that these players are brought in to be developed, and whilst that they are being bedded in at the minute, in terms of the game time, I think that the game time that they're getting is because we haven't got the players in that we probably would have hoped that we would get in by the time the season started. But yeah, two players in those attacking areas, and one of them is definitely a number 9. I'd seen a lot of talk the other day when they'd announced the squad numbers for Latte Lath and for Engel, that because Latte Lath's number's 9, that he's the marquee man. Well, he might be, but I forgot that to be the marquee man, you have to have number 9 on the back of your shirt, like Rodrigo Muniz did last season. Yeah, it seems like a nonsense argument to me, but there you go. I think that we are a striker, a player with, as you say, that killer instinct, that clinical edge. We need, and I think a lot of teams in the league need it. So it's easy to say we need him, but to get a player of that sort of,
The right word would be a certain pedigree,
yeah,
where what I've mentioned previously in earlier podcasts this season would be someone where you might look at the fee, you might look at the name, you might look at the goal record and think, look, every signing's a gamble, regardless of how much you pay or whether it's a loan or permanent. But someone that you look at and think they're coming in with a certain pedigree and they are going to start games. It isn't
yeah,
going to be a Morgan Rogers, who I'm not criticising at all. I thought he really showed real glimpses yesterday, especially in the 10 that were quite exciting by all accounts. But sort of a player that when they are signed, you are going to know that, yeah, that's not who we're going to pin our hopes on, but someone that the fans are really going to think, yeah, that's our sort of signing where the rest of the league looks around and thinks that's their Akpom replacement.
yeah, yeah. And as you mentioned, you could look at anything when you sign that player, the name, the record, but it's probably going to be the fee,
Yeah,
really. And okay, Latte Lath's come in for what was it, €5 million, something like that. So about 3.5, 4 million quid. I think, yeah, that is a good chunk going on a centre forward. But I think that I would, if he's our number 9, I'd probably be expecting a higher fee. I can't lie about that. I think that whilst the world in terms of transfer fees has evolved and there's been a pandemic and you've seen championship teams sort of rein it in a little bit in terms of spending, I think that I'm still expecting a 7, 8, £9 million signing. You saw the links to Strand Larsen last year, and it was something like €11 million. Well, we wouldn't be interested if we didn't have that money to spend. Um, so it is clearly there. Of course, money has gone out of the club this year, but it has come back in terms of a big, massive transfer fee for Chuba Akpom. So I am expecting another centre forward. If not, I can't I can't lie. I'll probably be on this podcast in 2 weeks' time, and you'll be able to see in my face that I'll be incredibly annoyed if we're sort of pinning our hopes in on Latte Lath and Matt Crooks as a deputising striker up
Yeah.
until at least.
Yeah, I think even not so much. It wouldn't be a case of, for me. I think we need two, and I could see a world where Latte is the number one striker, and I wouldn't be massively against it. And even then, I still think we need a striker. But certainly, if he is going to be number one, then a number 10, where Morgan Rogers has been playing, a statement signing. Obviously, we've spoken about a potential fee there. It may be a loan signing from a Premier League club that everyone sort of looks around and thinks, wow, how have Middlesbrough managed to get that deal done? But certainly, I must say, that is what I'm looking at in the final 2 weeks. And I think it'll be a sign, really, of, for me, what I will probably measure my sort of mark of where I think we can finish this season. I honestly think I would place that much importance on the next 2 weeks and that sort of statement signing that I'm talking about. And it will also, very interestingly, show, I think, the club's aspirations and the club's ambitions for this season. Because if we don't see that, and again, this isn't a swipe at Morgan Rogers, you look at Morgan Rogers as a replacement for Chuba Akpom and think, is that really, if you'd have told people at the end of last season that he was going to be the Chuba Akpom replacement, would many people have been very happy about that? And listen, I also understand that people might be screaming at this podcast saying, well, you hadn't heard of Matoma when Trossard was sold. Yes, okay, I somewhat understand that. But also, we've had fees from Tav, we've had fees from Spence, and as you say, there was big bids going for Strand Larsen. It might be a sort of, I don't know, I don't want to call myself almost spoiled, but it might be a spoiled fan with too high aspirations. I might be completely out of touch here, but I just still feel that we are lacking that signing, that statement signing. As I say, a loan from a Premier League club or a club abroad that people are going to basically take notice of and think, yeah, okay, that's Middlesbrough saying to the rest of the league, we aren't just going to settle to try and scrape into the playoffs this season.
Yeah, and I do feel the same. And there will be fans that I've seen on Twitter that are sort of calling us spoiled a little bit, which is fine. I don't mind that. But my hope is that the players of last season are replaced somewhat, and with the players that we brought in so far, yeah, at the start of the window, I was relatively pleased bringing these players in. Development signings, players for the future, and I do want us to move to the sort of Brentford model where you sign players that no one's heard of and you develop them and try and sell them on for profit. Completely on board with it. Completely on board with it. But in the same breath, I want to see sort of success of some kind going on in present day. I don't just want the bright future in 4 years' time. As a paying fan, I want to see it now. And I think that's fine as well. And as I mentioned, £4 million or so for Emmanuel Latte-Lath, that's fine. It's still a big fee. And as I mentioned before, there's been a pandemic. It's sort of changed the way that championship clubs have been spending money. But I'm just constantly rolling around my head every day of the transfer window is remembering a few years ago, we spent in the same window £7 million on Aidan Flint, £7 million on George Saville. So if those players were going for that fee,
Yeah,
and we saw their level at Middlesbrough, then to get a centre forward that's going to score you 15, 20 goals, it's going to cost 25 million quid probably if they're going for that.
yeah,
So
worrying.
I'm expecting 10 million around or just below 8, 7, 8 at least.
Yeah, I mean, goodness me, we don't want to sort of fall into that trap of parachute payments, FC. And I think, in fairness, obviously, we're speaking about £7 million signings and how wrong they were at the time. But the good thing is now, and almost the reason why I'm so enthusiastic and I'm so desperate for us to spend a little bit more on a statement signing or put it towards a loan signing is because I trust the recruitment team much more now. You look at £7 million signings in the past, Aidan Flint, it's got Tony Pulis's stupid little hat written all over it, hasn't it? Now, I look at Kieran Scott, I look at the additions we've made, and you can probably count on one hand how many real sort of bad signings we've made under his stewardship. Matthew Hoppe springs to mind. Rodrigo Muniz was a loan, but it was somewhat of a gamble. I can kind of understand it. And in fairness to Rodrigo Muniz, it was a case of really he just wasn't the right man for Carrick's system. And okay, yes, he didn't sort of show signs that he was some world beater and then he just didn't fit the system anymore. But I don't think it was a horrendous signing under Wilder. I'll stand by that until, if anyone wants to debate me about it, I'm happy to stand by that. But yeah, there's more confidence in the recruitment team. Hopefully, Steve Gibson is now willing to sort of almost put his money where his mouth is a little bit more with the money that we've had coming in. And I just hope that we can go out and, as I say, I don't want to say the word statement signed again because I feel like I've said it about 18 times in the past 3 minutes. But yes, I think we've made our points sort of loud and clear about what we want and need towards the back end of the transfer window. And to be honest, if you're watching on YouTube, whilst we've been having this discussion, you may have noticed that as we've been recording, the darkness has descended on the podcast. And actually, I've got a lamp just behind the camera, which has probably made me look incredibly shiny throughout. So if that has sort of come to your attention, I do apologise for that. But yeah, our recording time as of now, around 10 to 9. Basically, we need a studio set up, Nathan. We need to improve the quality of, or get some blackout blinds or something. I'm not too sure. But yes, that's, I guess, probably not what you want to hear us talk about on a Middlesbrough podcast. But, Nathan, without me rambling too much, we do have a game next week. And I hope that the sort of pathetic fallacy of me saying the darkness has descended on the podcast isn't a phrase that'll be used next week when we talk about the West Brom game. We travel to the Hawthorns Thankfully, Daryl Dike is injured, I believe, so he's not going to score two after 30 seconds or whatever it was last year. But it is going to be a very difficult game against Carlos Corberán's West Brom, which, I mean, any of Carlos Corberán's teams are a difficult test, but West Brom have certainly got some players that can hurt this Middlesbrough side.
Yeah, they do. Of course, DK would have been one of them, but yeah, he's out for a long period of time, which, yeah, we wish him all the best in his recovery and what have you, but I'm glad he's not playing against us because he has that knack of scoring. But yeah, they do have other threats in that side. Of course, the ones that we talked about so much last year were John Swift and Jed Wallace, both brought in to West Bromwich Albion on free transfers and massive wages as well, as we've seen with a few FFP discussions going on there. But yeah, those two, we know what they're like in the Championship, tricky customers, and on their day can be, well, some of the best players in the Championship, I suppose. And of course, when we went there last year, they raced into a 2-goal lead and just shut up shop. And that's what Carlos Corberán sides are like. They do not like conceding goals. They are very much defensively astute. And yeah, the three at the back is what they roll with. Not really the three in midfield anymore that they did sort of go with for periods of last season. But they sort of start with a front three now, which usually consists of Wallace and Swift, either side of, at this moment in time, Brandon Thomas Asante, which at the time when West Brom signed him, I thought it was a good signing. And for the fee that they got him for, it appears that I was correct, really, because every single time I seem to check a West Brom result and see who scored, it seems to be him. And I know that in the previous game that they've just played on Friday night away at Leeds, he did score by Superman punching the ball in the net. But a goal's a goal, especially with the officials in the league not seeing that. But yeah, they've got danger men up front, good at the back, and the Hawthorns is a difficult place to go. I've been 3 times, and in my experiences, we've never lost. And when I don't go, we usually lose, like we did last season. And I won't be at the game on Saturday, so we'll enjoy the podcast next week, Chris.
For you, for audio listeners, I've pretty much just recreated the famous Neil Warnock meme with my hands behind my head as Nathan has just revealed that he has put the kiss of death on from not visiting the Hawthorns next week, which is incredibly disappointing, Nathan. But yes, as you say, if you believe in that kind of stuff, which you probably shouldn't, but from previous podcasts over the years, we've kind of actually almost talked into existence sometimes by players that we've mentioned or sort of hoodoos that we've seemed to almost create ourselves. So hopefully in this circumstance, it isn't one of those situations.
Well, in the most humorous way possible, there is an ex-Middlesbrough player in the West Bromwich Albion ranks, and that man is, of course, Alex Mort, the Mo Dog, as me and you refer to him as. And as we mentioned on the podcast, in that Norwich game last season where he made a tackle pre-assist, going back to your mention of a pre-assist earlier on in the podcast, Chris, we were very hopeful. Well, me in particular was very hopeful to be able to use some Alex Moore meme videos that I had firmly stored away in my camera roll when he signed for the club last August. And I'm hoping, for all it's holy, that those videos aren't going to come back and bite me on the ass, because they're still in my camera roll, and we didn't quite get to see the trademark Alex Moore rocket that he apparently leaves at least one of at every one of his former clubs. But we may see one.
Nathan, let's not even discuss it. I think that's enough and time to wrap up the podcast, to be honest, because the thought of it makes me feel sick. And actually, with sort of Alex Mowat's growing impact towards the back end of last season, it would really quite sadden me even more. Yeah, dear me, that would be quite something. I don't want to think about it yet, and I don't want to leave this podcast on a sour note. So I'm going to take it in my own hands to basically just try and imagine that I didn't hear that and leave the podcast there for this week. So, Nathan, West Brom next week. I'm not going to ask you for a prediction, because you'll probably say something that involves an Alex Mowat screamer. But from me and yourself, and again for audio listeners, Nathan is currently laughing his head off whilst jinxing the whole of next week's podcast. So I hope you find yourself funny, Nathan. But yes, I won't ramble on anymore. And I will say thank you ever so much for watching and listening to this week's podcast. Please do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and also to our audio platforms, of course. As the transfer window rumbles on, be sure to check out our Twitter and other social media pages, which are simply at Boropolis. And I think that is all from us this week. So thank you ever so much for watching and listening. And we will hopefully see you next week with a very, very upbeat podcast. We will see you next week.